Okay, so you're here with us because you really want to cut through all that noise out there and get right to the heart of it all. You've given us your reading list, we've been digging in, and today our focus is laser sharp. Excerpts from Annie Duke's Quit. The power of knowing when to walk away. And looking at this stack of sources that you sent us, it's clear you're really trying to figure out how to make better choices. And Annie Duke's work is a really powerful way to understand that, like a really crucial part of all that, knowing when to quit.
Yeah, when you dive into these ideas from Duke, the thing that really jumps out at you right away is this tension. This like fundamental tension. We're surrounded by this culture that just celebrates never giving up. It lionizes people who just stick it out no matter what. But Duke does something really brilliant here. She shows us the other side of the coin, the Mito, the intelligence, the strategic advantage of knowing exactly when to say enough.
I love that. When does never give up become stubborn? When is all that grit that we always hear about a good thing, and when does it become something that holds you back? That's what we're going to unpack for you.
Yeah, and it's obvious this isn't just some self-help trend. The thinkers who've endorsed Duke's work are a huge sign of that. We're talking about guys like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, Nobel Prize winners in economics who understand how we make decisions better than almost anyone.
Exactly. And it's not just the academics. You've got people who run huge companies, making billion-dollar decisions every day. And they're all saying that knowing when to quit, this skill is hugely important. So it tells you that it's not some niche thing. It's like a core part of making good decisions. It doesn't matter what you do.
So your mission for this deep dive, it's built just for you from what you asked for, is to change how you think about quitting. We're going to break down that idea of quitting being a failure. Instead, we'll show you it's actually a powerful tool to make better decisions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. Annie Duke uses a really great story right at the beginning. Almost larger than life. Muhammad Ali. I mean, we all know the story, the rumble in the jungle back in '74. Nobody thought he could do it.
Okay.
But he goes and defeats George Foreman, who's younger, undefeated, to get back the heavyweight title. Remember, he'd been stripped of it for his stance on Vietnam. Talk about sticking to your principles, right? Overcoming the impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. That fight made him a legend. This image of a guy who wouldn't break, who fought through all that adversity. People were against him. It's that classic story we love, pure determination wins.
But, and here's where Duke throws in a twist. She then takes us through the 7 years after that fight, from 75 to 81. Ollie just keeps fighting, even though there were so many warning signs. His close friend, Teddy Brenner, put together his fights at Madison Square Garden, and even he basically begged Ali to retire. His own doctor, Freddie Pacheco, saw some scary stuff in Ollie's medical reports after fights. He told him straight up, it's time to hang up the gloves. And it's not like these were just some worried friends. These guys saw his condition firsthand. They saw the signs of decline. Brenner was so worried after that brutal 15-round fight against Ernie Shavers that he said Madison Square Garden wouldn't host any more of Ollie's fights.
And still, he fought. He even lost to Leon Spinks, a guy who was just starting out. And then you can't forget that fight with Laurie Holmes in 1980. Sylvester Stallone, he was at the fight and said it was like watching a man being dissected alive in the later rounds. Still, Ali wouldn't quit.
It's such a powerful illustration of what Duke is saying. The same drive that made him a champion may have hurt him later on. The neurological damage, the Parkinson's diagnosis he got in '84, they're probably because of all those punches he took in those later fights.
So this whole two sides of Ali thing really shows the problem, right?
Yeah.
That just going for it isn't always the best. We have to really pay attention to what's actually happening around us. The same force that made him a legend also made him miss the signs that it was time to stop.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really important point. We, as a society, are biased against quitting. Just think about the words we use. When we talk about people who never give up,
Yeah.
we have so many positive words: can-do attitude, unwavering commitment, gutsy, stick-to-itiveness.
You're right. We praise those who just keep pushing. But then think about quitting. All negative words. Quitter, coward, failure, weak, dropout. Duke even points out that there's no good noun for quit, the way there is for sticking with it.
Yeah, and this whole idea that quitting is bad, it's everywhere. All these stories we hear about success, they're all about working hard and never giving up. Think of Thomas Edison. He supposedly said he never failed. He just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Abby Wambach, the soccer star, her whole thing was never say die. And these business giants like Conrad Hilton and Richard Branson, we love how dedicated they were.
It's like that saying, winners never quit and quitters never win. So that's stuck in our heads. But Duke really takes this apart. She says that to really succeed, You need to choose what you go after. And this is important. You need to know what to give up on, what's not working. Imagine someone who just can't sing trying to be a professional opera singer, no matter how much they practice. Or a 60-year-old trying to be an Olympic gymnast. Like, at some point, being persistent is just not realistic.
Right. It's not about just pushing hard no matter what. It's about being smart and knowing what's worth your time and energy and what isn't. To succeed, you got to make those tough choices to cut your losses and focus on something else.
And then there's how we even talk about quitting. Lindsey Vonn, that amazing skier who had all those injuries, she said she was opening a new chapter when she retired, not giving up. Even someone as tough and determined as her wouldn't use the word quit.
It's so interesting, right? Everyone wants to make quitting sound less harsh. We avoid all the negativity that comes with it. Vonn, she's all about never giving up. She came back from so many injuries. But even she had to use a softer word.
It's everywhere you look. Duke talks about how many books use the word pivot in their titles. It's like a code word for quitting. The big pivot, pivot to win, pivot or perish. Like saying quit is just a bad thing.
But Duke says it simply, quitting just means you stop doing something. That's it. It's a neutral thing. It's us. We're the ones who made it into something bad. That's why it's so hard to accept, even when it's the smart thing to do.
To show how messed up our view is, she uses this idea of stop losses, like in trading and negotiations. In the preface, there's a quote from Knuth, the founder of dynamic trading tactics. He says, "The only shortcut to being profitable is knowing how to use stop losses." And from the win-win negotiation course, he agrees. He says choosing when to stop will get you the best results.
Stop losses are really useful here. It's about setting rules for when you get out of something, whether it's stocks or a personal goal. It helps you avoid losing too much and keeps your emotions out of it when it's time to change course.
So this idea of having an exit plan becomes really clear in the next part. Duke talks about the 1996 Everest disaster. Everest became really commercialized. Companies like Adventure Consultants would guide people up for a lot of money, like $70,000. And it was really dangerous, obviously. Thin air, freezing temperatures, and it's just physically brutal.
Yeah, and in this super dangerous environment, these companies had to have really strict safety rules. One of the most important was turnaround times. That meant climbers had to start going back down at a certain time, even if they didn't reach the top. Why? Because going down is statistically more dangerous. If you go too late, you get tired, it gets dark, and people die. It wasn't just about getting to the top, it was about getting back alive.
Duke talks about 3 climbers on an Adventure Consultants team: Stuart Hutchison, John Task, and Luke Kosicki. They were trying to reach the summit, but they were stuck behind a slower group. They lost a lot of time. It was almost 11:30 a.m. when they checked their watches, and they remembered their leader, Rob Hall, had set a firm 1 p.m. turnaround time.
And what they did is really important. They decided to turn back, even though they were only a few hundred feet from the top. They knew why that turnaround time was there, to keep them safe. So they followed it. They went back to Camp Aurora and eventually got off the mountain.
Now think about their leader, Rob Hall, and another climber, Doug Hansen. Hall, he was known for being really strict about turnaround times. He even made someone turn back just 300 feet from the summit the year before. But that day, he broke his own rule, waiting for Hansen to get to the top.
And it was tragic. Both of them died on the mountain. It shows how badly we want to keep going, especially when we're close to a goal we've worked so hard for. We can ignore even the most basic safety rules and logic.
Duke makes a really good point. We never hear about the people who quit and are smart for it. Hutchison, Task, and Kosicki, they're not in any documentaries or books. But their choice that day might have been the most important one. They were the smart ones, but they're invisible.
We need to hear about these successful quitters. If we don't, we keep thinking that only those who never give up, no matter what, are the ones to admire. We gotta change our view and see the strength in knowing when to walk away.
Which brings us to this idea. Quitting can be a smart way to make decisions. Duke says that quitting and persevering are 2 sides of the same coin. Anytime you're thinking about quitting, you're also thinking about keeping going.
Yeah, totally. The fact that you can quit makes starting something less scary. Like, it's not forever. Imagine if every choice you made was permanent. You'd be stuck with the first project you ever worked on, even if it sucked. Being able to change direction, to get off a path that's not working, is so important when life is always changing.
It's about being adaptable, about being able to bounce back. She connects this to the fail fast idea from Silicon Valley. That minimum viable product MVP thing. You put something out there quick, see what people think, and if it's not working, you change it or stop completely. She even talks about how Richard Pryor used to test his jokes in small clubs. He'd bomb one night, learn from it, and make his act better.
It's like constantly experimenting and adjusting. You try, you learn, and you make decisions based on what you find out. And sometimes that means quitting. Even dating is kind of like an MVP for relationships. You're seeing if you're compatible, figuring out what you like, and you can always walk away if it's not right.
But if quitting can be so smart, why is it so hard to do? Duke talks about the seduction of just keep going. It's partly because we don't know what will happen if we keep going or if we quit. You can't guarantee success if you keep pushing, but you also don't know what you might miss if you stop.
Yeah, and there's this part of us that just wants to know how it would have ended if we'd kept going. That what if question. It's really hard to ignore. It's like those mythical sirens who trick sailors with the promise of secret knowledge. We get tempted to keep going, even when things look bad, just to see what happens.
And it's even harder when you're almost done with a goal you've had for a long time. You've put in so much work, so much time. It's like, I've come too far to give up now, even if the goal isn't worth it anymore, or if it'll cost you too much to get there.
To show why it's so important to quit on outdated strategies, Duke uses a really interesting example. She lists all these companies that advertised during the 2002 Super Bowl that don't exist anymore. AOL, Blockbuster, Circuit City, CompUSA, Gateway, Radio Shack, Sears. These were huge companies, but they couldn't adapt to how things were changing. They wouldn't quit their old ways of doing business, and it killed them. It shows that refusing to quit when something's broken will destroy you in the long run.
Blockbuster is like the poster child for that, isn't it? They could have bought Netflix way back when, but they were so stuck in their ways. The world was changing, but they weren't.
And it's not just individuals who struggle with this. Whole companies can too. They need to look at themselves, be honest about what's not working, and either change or shut down. If they want to survive, they got to be able to quit.
Then Duke brings in poker, which is kind of unexpected. She quotes Kenny Rogers' The Gambler. You've got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run. 3 out of 4 of those are about quitting.
Poker is actually a great way to understand why quitting is good. Knowing when to fold, get rid of your bad cards is probably the most important skill for a good poker player. If you couldn't fold, it'd just be all luck.
She explains that good poker players are much better at knowing when a hand isn't worth playing. They'll only play a few of their starting hands, while beginners play way too many. They keep hoping that any 2 cards can win, even though it's not likely.
Duke says it's true that any 2 cards could win, but usually the chances are so bad that it's just not smart to keep playing. Good poker players know they have to cut their losses, even if they might have folded a winning hand. It's all about making the most money over many games, not just one.
And it's a lot like that fear of missing out we all have. We don't want to accept a small loss, so we keep hoping for a big win, even if it's unlikely. Beginners keep playing weak hands, hoping for a lucky break, instead of accepting the loss and waiting for a better chance.
This leads to the story of Stuart Butterfield and his online game, Glitch. It came out in 2011 and got some good reviews. People liked it. But the important thing, how many free players started playing, was really low, like less than 5%. And that's with a lot of people signing up.
And even with all the advertising they did, Butterfield had this feeling that the game just wouldn't make money in the long run. He looked at the numbers, thought about what might happen, and realized that even if more people played, it was going to be a long, hard road to actually make a profit.
What's amazing is that he shut down Glitch in 2012. Even though they still had $6 million left and they were getting more players than ever, he was smart enough to see that if they kept going, they'd just use up all their money on something that probably wouldn't work.
It must have been a huge decision. He'd worked on it for 4 years. His whole team and his investors believed in it, and it was tied to his reputation. Quitting when things seemed to be going okay was not an easy call.
But Duke says this was the right call. By stopping Glitch before they ran out of money, Butterfield saved resources and gave his team the chance to try something else, something that might work better. And this is where things get really interesting.
Because out of Glitch came something amazing: Slack. It started as a way for the Glitch team to communicate with each other. They realized it could be a product on its own, something that could help other teams work better together.
And the rest is history. Slack launched in 2013, went public in 2019 worth billions, and then Salesforce bought it for even more. It shows what can happen when you quit one thing to do something completely different that ends up being a huge success.
Duke makes it clear. Even if Slack hadn't happened, quitting Glitch and giving the money back to investors was still the right thing to do. He didn't keep throwing money at something that was probably going to fail.
The glitch story teaches us something important about quitting at the right time. It often feels too early. If you're quitting when you should, things might not look that bad yet. The key is to be able to see the problems coming before they hit you.
It's about looking past the now and seeing the bigger picture. She mentions Muhammad Ali again and says the best time for him to retire might have been right after he beat Foreman, or, at the very latest, after the Shavers fight in '77. By then, the signs were there that his body was starting to break down.
And she talks about this management role. If you're thinking about firing someone, the best time to do it might be the first time that thought comes into your head. The idea is that we often put off tough choices, hoping things will get better, even when it's clear they won't.
If you hold on to something that's not working, you're not just avoiding a loss, you're actually holding yourself back. You're missing out on better chances you could be going after with that same energy and time. When you quit strategically, you can actually move toward your goals faster.
Duke gives us a way to figure out when to stick and when to quit. She calls it expected value. It's basically a way to weigh the possible outcomes of a decision. You think about how likely each outcome is and how good or bad it would be for you.
She uses a coin flip example to make it clear. Imagine you can bet on a coin flip. If it's heads, you win $100. Tails, you lose $50. The expected value of that bet is positive. Why? Because even though you could win or lose, the potential win is much bigger than the potential loss.
And she says expected value isn't just about money. You can use it for any decision where you might gain or lose something. Happiness, well-being, relationships, your job, anything. Stuart Butterfield basically did an expected value calculation in his head for Glitch and realized that the chances of it being successful weren't good enough to keep going.
She then tells the story of Dr. Sarah Olston Martinez.
Yeah.
She's an ER doctor who loved her job at first, but then she started to really dislike it. Paperwork was piling up, she had no time for herself, and it was affecting her family.
Duke asked her a simple but deep question. Imagine it's a year from now. How unhappy would you be if you stayed in your job? How unhappy would you be if you took a new job? Thinking about it this way made Sarah realize that staying in her job would probably make her miserable, while changing jobs gave her a real chance at being happier.
That's a perfect example of expected value. You think about how likely it is you'll be happy or unhappy with each choice.
Duke is a big believer in mental time travel. We need to imagine ourselves in the future to see how our choices might play out. But she also says it's super important to look back, to learn from what's happened before, our own successes and failures, and those of others.
She brings up the Everest story again. Climbers before 1996 knew how important it was to follow those turnaround times. Those past experiences should have guided the choices they made that day. She also talks about how the military studies past battles to learn from them, both the wins and the losses. They use that to make better decisions today.
And your own past can teach you a lot, too. Think back to similar situations you've been in before. What did you learn? Those lessons can be really helpful when you're facing a tough choice now.
This leads to an experiment done by economist Stephen Levitt. He made a website that flipped a virtual coin to help people make hard choices. People would tell the website their problem, and the website would tell them either to keep doing what they were doing or to make a change and quit.
Levitt checked in with those people months later. And what he found was surprising. The people who followed the coin's advice to quit, even if they didn't want to at first, said they were much happier than those who didn't quit.
It shows that we usually wait way too long to quit things that aren't working for us. If you're really on the fence about whether to quit, the data says quitting might be the best thing for you in the long run. It's crazy how much we're biased against quitting. It can really mess up how we see things.
And Duke uses the idea of jumping the shark to show how we often stick with things too long. It describes that moment when a good TV show, or anything really, starts going downhill and it's never going to be good again. It comes from an episode of Happy Days where Fonzie jumped over a shark on water skis.
It's that point where something awesome just gets so bad that you know it's ruined. It's easy to see when it's already happened, but much harder to see it coming.
And it's funny, isn't it? We judge people who hold on to something way past its prime, but we also judge people who quit too early before everyone else sees that it's going bad.
This brings us to Dave Chappelle and his decision to quit Chappelle's Show. And Phoebe Waller-Bridge ending Fleabag after 2 seasons. Both shows were hugely popular, like at their peak, but they both walked away.
In Chappelle's case, he could see the show going downhill. He wanted to make sure he was still being creative, not just going through the motions. And Waller-Bridge felt that ending Fleabag after 2 seasons was the perfect ending for the story.
Fans were bummed, of course. They wanted more. But the creators were thinking ahead. They could sense that things might be about to go bad. And for Chappelle, quitting when he did actually led to him having a much better career later on. He was in control.
These stories show that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is quit when you're at the top, before things start to go downhill. It takes vision and the guts to ignore what everyone else is saying, that you should just keep going as long as things are good.
So, to wrap up our deep dive into Annie Duke's quit, here are the key takeaways. It's tough to go against what society tells us, but knowing when to quit is super important. Quitting at the right time can help you avoid bad stuff and open up better opportunities, like we saw with Ollie and the Everest climbers. We got to stop thinking of quitting as a failure. It's a smart move. Expected value is a great way to make these tough decisions. It's probably better to quit sooner rather than later, especially if you're not sure about something. And sometimes the smartest thing to do is walk away when you're at the top.
And one last thing to think about, as we've been talking about quitting, is there anything in your own life, a project, a relationship, something you've committed to where maybe quitting, even if it feels weird or scary now, could actually make things much better for you? What shark are you maybe headed toward without realizing it? And what would happen if you jumped in a different direction, toward a new opportunity or something that makes you happier in the long run?
Lots to think about. And if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out Annie Duke's book, Quit: The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away. And take another look at those examples we talked about today. There's a lot more to discover there. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.